The sun was blazing high in the sky, beating down on the desert with a heat so intense it felt like it could melt metal. Sand stretched endlessly in every direction, forming rolling dunes that shifted with the wind. The air shimmered with waves of heat, making it hard to see far ahead. A lone figure moved carefully across this harsh landscape. A human mechanic, carrying his worn-out toolkit and walking boots that had seen better days. He had been traveling through this desert for hours, checking an old mining rover that had broken down near a remote settlement. It was a job like many others he had done before, but today something was different. As he climbed a small dune, he noticed an unusual shape far off in the distance. At first he thought it was a mirage, the kind the desert liked to play tricks with, but as he squinted against the bright sunlight, he realized it wasn't a mirage at all. Something was moving, or rather struggling, in the sand. He walked closer cautiously, shielding his eyes with his hand, and what he saw made his heart skip a beat. 3 creatures lay there, tied up with thick, glowing restraints. They were unlike anything he had ever seen in his life. Their bodies were massive and covered in shimmering scales that reflected the sunlight in colors that seemed almost unreal. The largest one had wings folded tightly against its sides, its head high and proud despite being trapped. The smallest one trembled and whimpered softly, the sound almost human in its sorrow. The middle one was tense, eyes darting around, claws scraping the sand as if ready to fight at any moment. He froze for a moment, unsure what to do. They were clearly dangerous, but at the same time it was obvious they were suffering. He could see how the ropes were cutting into their skin, how their breathing was ragged from the heat and exhaustion. He had worked with machines all his life, fixing things that were broken, but this was alive, and it was desperate. Something inside him stirred, an instinct to help even when the risk was high. Carefully, he lowered his bag to the ground and approached slowly, making sure not to make sudden movements. The largest dragon hissed, a sound that made his chest tighten with fear, but it didn't move forward. He noticed the glowing restraints pulsing faintly, almost like they were alive themselves. He crouched down near the smallest dragon, speaking softly, though he wasn't sure it understood anything. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," he murmured. The smallest dragon looked at him with wide, intelligent eyes, its whimpers becoming slightly calmer. It was a strange feeling, connecting with a creature so alien, and yet somehow he felt that it trusted him just a little. He looked around for a stick or a tool, something to examine the restraints. He had a wrench and some small cutting tools in his bag, but nothing like this had ever prepared him for tampering with alien technology. He could see strange markings along the metal, symbols that glowed faintly, unlike anything he had ever studied. While he was thinking, the wind picked up, carrying tiny grains of sand that stung his skin. He pulled a cloth from his bag to cover his face, shielding himself as he worked. Every second counted. He knew that if he stayed too long, the heat could overwhelm them all. Or worse, someone else might come along, and not with good intentions. The desert wasn't empty, and these creatures were valuable. He examined the largest dragon's restraint from a distance. It was thick, glowing with a faint blue light, and it looked as if any wrong move could trigger some kind of defense mechanism. He had no idea what would happen if he cut it the wrong way. But standing there and doing nothing wasn't an option either. His mind raced with possibilities, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Panicking would only make things worse. Then he noticed movement in the distance, a shimmer that suggested something was approaching. At first he thought it might be another traveler, but the movement was too smooth, too mechanical. Drones, small flying machines, patrolling the desert. He didn't know if they were friendly or hostile, but their presence meant one thing: he had very little time. He had to act, and act quickly. He knelt closer to the smallest dragon, reaching out carefully to touch its nose, a gesture that somehow felt reassuring. It flinched at first, but then allowed him a gentle touch. Its scales were warm under his hand, and he felt a strange bond forming in that moment. He whispered again softly, "I'm going to help you. You'll be free soon." The middle dragon growled softly, low in its throat, warning him not to get too close, but it didn't attack. He realized he would have to gain the trust of all 3 if he wanted to succeed. He took a deep breath, pulled out a small cutting tool, and examined the smallest restraint first. The glowing line seemed to pulse in reaction to his presence, and his hand shook slightly. He had no formal training for this, but he relied on intuition, on patience, and a steady hand honed from years of repairing delicate machinery. The sun was relentless, beating down on him and the creatures alike. He felt sweat running down his back, his clothes sticking to his skin, but he ignored it. Every moment he hesitated was another moment the dragons suffered. He started with small adjustments, loosening tiny bolts, carefully sliding the glowing clamps away from their skin. The smallest dragon watched him with wide eyes, occasionally tilting its head as if trying to understand what he was doing. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to blur under the sun's heat and the pressure of the task. He could see the exhaustion on the dragons' faces. They had been left here for too long, abandoned, and their energy was fading. Yet despite the heat, the danger, and the unknown, he kept going, driven by something he couldn't quite explain. Compassion, courage, or maybe just a human instinct to protect those who could not protect themselves. As he worked, the wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of something strange, metallic, otherworldly. He paused for a moment, glancing around. The desert felt alive, vast and indifferent, yet here he was, a lone human standing between these magnificent creatures and potential doom. He whispered again to the smallest dragon, trying to calm it, and it nuzzled against his hand. A tiny gesture, but it gave him hope. He continued slowly, carefully, freeing one restraint at a time. The middle dragon watched him intently, and he could feel its tension slowly easing as it realized he meant no harm. The largest dragon remained wary, but his steady presence seemed to convey a simple truth. He was not the enemy. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert with hues of orange and red, he had managed to loosen 2 of the 3 restraints. The creatures were still bound, but they were closer to freedom than they had been in hours, or maybe days. He felt a surge of relief, a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the first steps of rescue had been successful. As the shadows grew longer, he realized that this was only the beginning. The desert was vast, the dragons were still vulnerable, and danger was never far away. Yet, despite the uncertainty, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. In this desert, under the scorching sun, he had become a guardian of something extraordinary, creatures from another world, abandoned and in need of help. And he was the only one who could give it. He settled down near the smallest dragon, shielding it from the last rays of sunlight with his body. The wind whispered around them, carrying the faint hum of the desert night. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, what dangers might approach, or whether he could even succeed in freeing all 3 dragons. But in that quiet moment, with the smallest dragon resting its head near his knee, he felt a flicker of hope, a promise that maybe, just maybe, they would survive. The desert stretched endlessly, unforgiving and merciless, yet he had taken the first step. He had chosen to act, to risk everything for creatures that no one else had bothered to save. And that choice, simple as it seemed, would set in motion a chain of events that neither human nor dragon could have imagined. The night had fallen over the desert, and the temperature had dropped slightly, giving some relief from the scorching sun. The human mechanic stayed close to the smallest dragon, keeping watch over the other 2 as they rested uneasily on the sand. The largest dragon had shifted slightly, keeping its head raised and wings folded, scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. The middle dragon's breathing was slower now, but its eyes never fully closed. They were cautious, and rightfully so. The mechanic realized that freeing them from the restraints was only the first challenge. There was still so much he didn't understand about these creatures. Their strength was enormous, their intelligence obvious in the way they watched him, and their reactions could be unpredictable. One wrong move could cause them to lash out in fear or anger. He had to be careful. Every step from here on out required patience and a plan. He examined the remaining restraints. Unlike the ones he had already loosened, these were more complex, with strange symbols that seemed to shift slightly when he looked at them directly. It was as if the devices were alive, reacting to his presence and intent. The mechanic was used to working on machines and engines, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. Every wire, every bolt, every glowing symbol demanded careful thought. He couldn't rush, and yet he felt a deep urgency. The longer they stayed bound, the weaker the dragons would become. As he considered his next move, the smallest dragon crawled closer and nudged his hand. Its scales were surprisingly warm, even in the cool desert night. He smiled softly, feeling a strange connection forming between them. It was comforting to know that at least one of them trusted him enough to let him get near. He whispered gently, "Don't worry, I'll get you out soon. Just a little longer." The dragon tilted its head almost as if it understood. Suddenly, a sound echoed in the distance. Soft, mechanical, almost like the whirring of tiny engines. The mechanic froze. His heart raced. The desert was supposed to be empty at night, but these sounds told a different story. He scanned the horizon and saw faint glimmers of light moving through the dunes. Scouting drones. They were coming closer. He didn't know if they belonged to the dragon's captors, or if they were some automated security system sent to watch the creatures. But one thing was certain. He had very little time. He needed to act fast. Slowly he pulled out his tools, trying to work on the middle dragon's restraints first. It didn't trust him yet, moving its head slightly away when he got too close. He took a deep breath, remembering what had worked with the smallest dragon. Gentle gestures, soft words, calm movements. He extended a hand, letting the dragon see that he wasn't a threat. For a moment it just stared at him, its glowing eyes reflecting the starlight. Then slowly it allowed him to touch the glowing clamp. Working carefully, he loosened the first part of the restraint. Sparks of faint blue light flared up, startling both him and the dragon, but he stayed calm, speaking in a soft tone to reassure it. The dragon flinched but didn't try to fight back. Step by step he adjusted the device, loosening bolts and wires with steady hands. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Not from the heat this time, but from tension and concentration. One wrong slip could injure the dragon, or worse, trigger some unknown defensive mechanism. As he worked, he kept glancing toward the horizon, watching the approaching drones. Their shadows flickered over the dunes, reminding him that danger was near. He knew he had to finish before they got too close. Moving faster, he adjusted another part of the device, testing it carefully. Slowly, the glowing restraint began to loosen, and the middle dragon let out a soft growl which the mechanic took as relief rather than threat. The largest dragon, observing everything, remained tense. Its massive body was coiled, wings partially open, ready to strike if needed. The mechanic knew he would have to gain its trust differently. Brute force would not work. Only patience, calmness, and respect would do. He decided to take a short break, leaning against a dune and studying the dragon. The creature's eyes followed him, intense and intelligent, like it was reading his every thought. It was impressive, even intimidating, but he felt a strange sense of connection forming, a recognition that he was trying to help, not harm. During this brief pause, he realized something else. The dragons were not only strong and intelligent, but they were also extremely aware of their surroundings. Every movement, every sound, even the tiniest shift in the sand caught their attention. They were survivors, used to danger, and capable of understanding threats in ways he could barely imagine. It made his task even more daunting, but also more meaningful. He had to be worthy of their trust if he wanted to succeed. Refocusing, he approached the largest dragon carefully. He crouched low, keeping his body non-threatening, and slowly extended a hand. The dragon's eyes narrowed and it hissed softly. He froze, not wanting to provoke it. Instead, he spoke in a calm, steady voice, repeating the same gentle words he had used with the smaller dragons. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then something remarkable happened. The dragon lowered its head slightly, just enough for him to see the restraint clearly. It was a small gesture, but it was a signal of tentative trust. With careful hands, he began working on the device. Sparks flared again, and the dragon's wings twitched, but it stayed still. The mechanic adjusted the clamps slowly, testing each connection before making any major movement. His heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the adrenaline surging through him. He couldn't afford mistakes. He had to free them all before the drones arrived. As he worked, he thought about how they had ended up here. The dragons were obviously important, possibly even royal, considering their intelligence and the technology restraining them. They hadn't wandered into the desert on their own. They had been placed here, abandoned, or left for capture. Someone had wanted to harm them, and he had stumbled into the middle of it. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but it also strengthened his resolve. He had to help them, no matter what. Hours passed, and the work continued under the stars. The mechanic's fingers were raw and sore, his body tired, but he pressed on. Step by step, restraint by restraint, he managed to loosen the devices, keeping his movements deliberate and careful. The middle dragon, now free, stayed close to him, its presence a comforting reminder that his efforts were working. The smallest dragon snuggled against him as he worked on the last restraint, giving him encouragement in its own silent way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the largest dragon's restraint clicked open. The glowing lights faded, and the device fell away into the sand. The dragon stepped back cautiously, testing its freedom. It flexed its wings and moved its massive head, still wary but no longer trapped. The mechanic let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The dragons were free, all three of them. For a moment, the desert was quiet except for the soft hiss of the wind through the dunes. The drones had not yet appeared, and he realized they might have been deterred by the sudden movement of the dragons or the darkness of night. Whatever the reason, they had a small window of safety and he intended to use it. The dragons didn't immediately run. They stayed close, eyes scanning the horizon, but there was no aggression. The smallest dragon crawled toward him, nudging his hand in a gesture of thanks or perhaps acknowledgement of the bond they now shared. The middle dragon rested its massive head near him, eyes half closed in trust. Even the largest dragon remained nearby, watching him with curiosity rather than suspicion. He realized then that freeing them had not only removed their physical chains, but had also started to build trust. The dragons had been abandoned, left to suffer in the desert, and he had risked everything to help them. That act had bridged a gap that no words could explain. In the vast, unforgiving desert, a human and 3 alien dragons had formed an unspoken alliance, born of courage, patience, and compassion. As the night deepened, the mechanic gathered some water and offered it to the dragons. They hesitated at first, unfamiliar with his gestures, but the smallest dragon lapped it up cautiously. The others followed, drinking carefully, always alert to their surroundings. It was a small act, but it strengthened the bond between them, creating trust that would be essential in the trials yet to come. By the time dawn approached, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, the mechanic and the dragons were ready to move. He knew the desert was vast and danger was still out there. The drones could return, predators could appear, and the dragons were still weak from their ordeal. But they were no longer chained, and they were no longer alone. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The mechanic stood, stretching his sore muscles, and looked at the dragons. They regarded him with intelligence and caution, but also something else, recognition. They knew he had risked everything for them, and in return they would follow him, at least for now. He smiled softly, feeling a mix of relief and determination. Their journey was just beginning, and he would not let them down. With that, he motioned for the dragons to follow, and they moved together, stepping carefully across the dunes as the first light of day touched the sand. It was a long, difficult journey ahead, but for the first time they were free, and that was all that mattered. The desert was alive with the colors of dawn, golden light stretching over the dunes and making the sand shimmer as if it were covered in tiny stars. The human mechanic stood at the edge of a large dune, looking down at the dragons he had freed the night before. They were stretching their wings, shaking off the stiffness from being bound for so long. The largest dragon flexed its claws carefully, testing the strength in its legs while the smallest one hopped around, its energy returning slowly. The middle dragon walked quietly beside the mechanic, its presence calm but watchful. The mechanic felt a strange mix of awe and responsibility. These creatures were not pets or wild animals. They were intelligent, powerful, and completely alien. He knew that one wrong step could lead to disaster. But he also felt a deep sense of pride and relief. They were alive, free, and for the first time in days, they could move without fear. The desert, however, offered no comfort. The sun climbed higher and the heat became intense. The mechanic adjusted his cap and tightened the straps on his bag, which carried supplies and tools. He knew they had to move carefully, or the heat would overwhelm them. The dragons were strong, but they had been weakened by captivity and hunger. Water was scarce and food was almost non-existent in this barren land. They started walking, moving along a path that seemed safest through the dunes. The smallest dragon stayed close, hopping over small ridges and sometimes nudging the mechanic's leg as if to make sure he was still there. The middle dragon walked quietly, scanning the horizon with keen, intelligent eyes. The largest dragon flew low above them, occasionally landing to sniff the sand and make sure nothing threatened their safety. Every step forward was careful, measured, and slow, because the desert could be unforgiving, and one mistake could endanger them all. As they walked, the mechanic tried to understand more about these creatures. Their scales reflected the sun in strange patterns, colors shifting from green to blue to gold depending on the angle. Their eyes were bright and intelligent, clearly capable of recognizing danger and understanding the intentions of others. He realized these dragons were not just animals. They were thinking, feeling beings who could make decisions, and perhaps even communicate in ways he didn't yet understand. Suddenly, the smallest dragon stopped and sniffed the air. Its ears, or whatever structures it had on its head, twitched, and it let out a soft warning sound. The mechanic froze, following its gaze, and noticed something moving in the distance. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then the movement became clearer. Tiny drones hovering above the sand, scanning for something. His heart raced. These drones could be hostile. They could belong to whoever had abandoned the dragons here, or to someone else entirely. Either way, they were a threat. He signaled the dragons to stay low, crouching behind a small dune for cover. The smallest dragon nestled close, trembling slightly, while the middle dragon lay down, keeping its head low. The largest dragon spread its wings slightly, ready to take flight if necessary. The mechanic peeked over the dune, assessing the situation. The drones were small but fast, their metal bodies reflecting the sunlight as they moved closer. He knew he had only moments to decide what to do. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a small mirror from his bag and angled it toward the sun, creating a sharp reflection that caught the attention of the drones. They paused, hovering for a moment, their sensors adjusting. The mechanic took a deep breath and whispered, "Follow me quietly." The dragons seemed to understand the urgency, moving with him in careful silence. They crept along the shadows of dunes, keeping out of the drone's direct line of sight. The journey continued for hours. The desert was relentless, and the sun's heat became almost unbearable. The mechanic offered water to the dragons whenever he could, using a small container he had packed. The smallest dragon drank eagerly while the others sipped cautiously. Food was harder to come by, but he had a few protein bars and dried rations. He shared them carefully, making sure the dragons got something to keep their strength. During these long hours, the mechanic began to notice something remarkable. The dragons were learning from him, observing his movements and responding in ways that showed intelligence beyond instinct. The smallest dragon started mimicking small gestures, like pointing or tilting its head to indicate direction. The middle dragon would pause when the mechanic stopped, waiting for his signal before moving again. Even the largest dragon began to coordinate its movements with the others, flying ahead to scout and then returning to guide them safely through difficult patches of sand. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the heat finally began to lessen, though the desert was still far from safe. The mechanic knew they couldn't stop yet. They needed shelter, and the dunes offered little protection from potential dangers. He scanned the landscape and spotted a small canyon in the distance, its rocky walls offering shade and a place to rest. He led the dragons carefully toward it, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon for any sign of the drones. Reaching the canyon, they settled down for a short rest. The dragons drank water and stretched, their bodies regaining some of the strength lost during the day. The mechanic took the opportunity to inspect the dragons more closely. The largest dragon had scratches along its scales, signs of previous struggle. The middle dragon had a small cut near its wing, likely from the restraints. The smallest dragon, while appearing unharmed, trembled slightly, still recovering from fear and exhaustion. He used clean rags from his bag to gently tend to the wounds, careful not to frighten them. Night fell again, and the desert grew cold. The mechanic and the dragons huddled together for warmth. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of peace in that moment. They were alive, they were together, and they had survived another day in a place that could have easily claimed their lives. The mechanic spoke softly to them, explaining that they would find safety soon, that they were not alone anymore. The dragons seemed to understand, resting near him and letting him know that trust was building. While they rested, the mechanic reflected on the day's events. Rescuing the dragons had been just the first step, but the real challenge was learning to move with them safely, earning their trust, and protecting them from dangers in a world that didn't understand their importance. He realized that this journey was bigger than just survival. It was about forming a bond that crossed species, worlds, and understanding. The dragons had trusted him with their lives, and he had to honor that trust with every decision he made. As the night deepened, a soft wind whispered through the canyon. The smallest dragon curled against him, and he felt its warmth and trust. The middle dragon rested nearby, eyes half closed but alert. The largest dragon lay slightly apart but kept its gaze fixed on the canyon entrance, ready to defend them all if needed. In that quiet moment, the mechanic understood something profound. He was no longer just a human in the desert. He was a protector, a companion, and in some small way part of this alien family. The first light of dawn began to touch the canyon walls, painting them in shades of orange and pink. The mechanics stretched, ready to continue their journey. The desert still held many dangers, heat, predators, and the drones, but for now they had survived. Together they would keep moving, one careful step at a time. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that they were stronger together. With a final glance at the dragons, he whispered, "Let's keep going. We're not safe yet, but we will be." The dragons responded in their own ways, the smallest one hopping eagerly, the middle one nodding its head slightly, and the largest dragon spreading its wings and letting out a low, rumbling sound. It was not just a sound of power. It was a sound of trust, of acknowledgement, and of readiness. They moved out of the canyon together, stepping carefully across the dunes, moving as one unit. The mechanic led the way, and the dragons followed, keeping close but maintaining their own awareness. Every step was cautious, every movement deliberate, but there was a sense of unity that had not existed before. They were no longer just creatures and a human. They were companions bound together by survival, trust, and courage. As they walked into the rising sun, the mechanic realized that this day had changed everything. The desert was still harsh, still dangerous, but he no longer felt alone in it. The dragons were with him, and together they would face whatever lay ahead. Each step forward was a testament to their resilience, their trust in each other, and the unspoken bond that had formed in the vast, unforgiving desert. The desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, a sea of gold and orange with waves of sand rippling under the heat. The human mechanic walked carefully, leading the three dragons across the dunes. They had rested briefly in the canyon, but the journey was far from over. The desert was full of dangers, not just the heat and shifting sand, but predators, drones, and the unknown forces that had left these dragons abandoned in the first place. The smallest dragon moved close to his side, hopping along cautiously but with growing energy. Its scales shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting colors he had never seen before. The middle dragon walked beside him, silent but alert, its eyes scanning the horizon constantly. The largest dragon flew low above them, gliding smoothly and watching for any threat. Even with their strength and size, the mechanic knew they were still vulnerable. They had been weakened by captivity and starvation, and he could see the signs in their movements: slower steps, occasional flinches, and cautious gestures as they moved. The mechanic tried to communicate with them in ways they could understand. He pointed to the path ahead, used hand gestures, and even softly tapped the sand to signal direction. The smallest dragon began to mimic his gestures, tilting its head or hopping toward where he pointed. The middle dragon paused when he stopped, waiting for his signal before continuing. Even the largest dragon seemed to understand that he was leading them, though it still moved cautiously, testing the terrain and ensuring safety. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. The desert heat became nearly unbearable, and the mechanic offered water from his small supply. The smallest dragon drank eagerly, while the other two sipped slowly, still unsure of the strange human and his intentions. He spoke softly, encouraging them, reminding them that they were safe at least as long as they stayed together. The sound of his voice seemed to calm them slightly, a small but important connection forming between human and dragons. Suddenly, the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, a subtle vibration that made the dragons pause. The largest dragon took to the air immediately, wings spread wide, scanning the horizon. The middle dragon crouched low, its muscles tense, and the smallest dragon whined softly, pressing close to the mechanic's leg. He followed their lead, looking carefully around the dunes, and saw it, a massive shape moving in the distance, partially hidden by sand. It was a predator, one adapted perfectly to the desert. Its scales blended with the sand, and its eyes glinted with a dangerous intelligence. The mechanic's heart raced. He knew he had to act quickly. He held up his hands, signaling the dragons to stay calm, and slowly backed toward a nearby dune, using it as cover. The smallest dragon pressed close, trembling, while the middle dragon stayed low, watching intently. The largest dragon circled above, ready to strike if necessary. The predator moved closer, and the mechanic realized that he couldn't fight it alone. He had to rely on the dragons. but he needed to ensure they didn't panic or attack him by mistake. He spoke softly, his voice calm and steady. "We stay together. We move slowly. Don't let it see us as prey." The smallest dragon looked at him, eyes wide, as if it understood every word. The middle dragon's tail flicked and it crouched lower. The largest dragon roared softly, a warning that the predator had better not approach. They waited, holding their positions as the predator prowled near the dune. The mechanic's mind raced, thinking of a plan. He remembered the reflective mirror he had used with the drones and quickly grabbed it from his bag. Using the sun's light, he flashed a sharp reflection toward the predator, hoping to confuse it. The predator froze, its head twitching, then snarled and backed away slightly. It seemed disoriented by the sudden burst of light. Seeing the predator hesitate, the mechanic signaled the dragons to move. They advanced slowly, carefully keeping low and silent. The smallest dragon stayed close, occasionally peeking out from behind him. The middle dragon followed his lead, and the largest dragon swooped low, keeping the predator at bay. Step by step, they moved past the danger, the predator watching but not pursuing, confused by the strange human and the creatures he commanded. Once the predator was out of sight, the mechanic let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The dragons relaxed slightly, though they remained alert. He offered water again, and this time all three drank, their trust in him growing stronger. The ordeal had bonded them, and he could feel it in the way they moved around him, watching his gestures and following his lead without hesitation. As the day wore on, the desert terrain began to change. The dunes gave way to rocky outcrops, cliffs, and narrow passages. The mechanic realized that these areas would provide more shelter from the sun, but they also presented new dangers: steep drops, unstable rocks, and hidden predators. He moved carefully, testing the ground before stepping, and gestured for the dragons to follow his path. The smallest dragon hesitated at first, but after a gentle nudge it hopped along, staying close to him. The middle dragon followed silently, and the largest dragon flew overhead, scanning the terrain for safety. While moving through the rocky passages, the mechanic noticed signs that they were not alone. Strange footprints, unusual markings in the sand, and the faint hum of distant machinery suggested that other beings had been here recently. His heart quickened. Whoever had abandoned the dragons might still be nearby, watching or searching for them. He knew they couldn't stop. They had to keep moving, stay alert, and stay together. The dragon, sensing his concern, remained close. The smallest dragon occasionally nudged his leg, as if offering reassurance, while the middle dragon kept its head low, scanning for danger. The largest dragon, ever watchful, flew low above them, ready to strike if needed. Together, they navigated the rocky terrain with careful precision, moving as a unit, communicating silently through gestures, glances, and instinct. By late afternoon, they reached a plateau that offered a wide view of the desert below. The mechanic paused, looking out over the landscape. He could see dunes stretching endlessly, rocky cliffs rising in the distance, and the faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off distant sand. It was beautiful but also daunting. They had come far, but there was still a long way to go. He signaled the dragons to rest, giving them water and a small amount of food. The smallest dragon curled near his feet. The middle dragon lay quietly beside him, and the largest dragon stretched its wings, basking in the warm light. As they rested, the mechanic reflected on their journey so far. They had survived the night in the canyon, avoided drones, and evaded predators. The dragons were no longer terrified. They trusted him, followed his lead, and even seemed to understand some of his gestures. He realized that this trust was fragile, built on careful actions, patience, and respect. Any mistake could undo it, but for now they were safe, and that gave him hope. Night began to fall again, and the temperature dropped sharply. The desert, which had been scorching during the day, became cold and harsh at night. The mechanic gathered the dragons close to keep them warm, sharing what little heat he could. The largest dragon lay slightly apart but remained alert, watching the plateau edges. The middle dragon rested near him, and the smallest curled tightly against his side. For the first time in days, they slept without fear of being restrained or attacked. As he watched over them, the mechanic knew that their journey was far from over. The desert was vast, and dangers still lurked. They needed to find shelter, water, and eventually a way to reach a safe place far from the reach of whoever had abandoned them. But in that moment, he felt a sense of accomplishment and connection. These dragons were no longer alone, and neither was he. They had survived together, and that bond would carry them through the challenges ahead. The first light of dawn approached again, casting long shadows across the plateau. The mechanic stretched, feeling the stiffness from a long day of walking and vigilance. The dragons began to stir, ready to move once more. He whispered to them softly, "We keep going. We find safety. We stay together." The smallest dragon hopped eagerly, the middle dragon nodded its head slightly, and the largest dragon flexed its wings. It was not just movement, it was a statement of trust, readiness, and shared purpose. With careful steps, they moved forward, navigating the rocky paths and descending toward a valley that promised shade and water. Every step required caution, but they moved as a team, each one relying on the other. The mechanic realized that this partnership was more than survival. It was friendship, built on trust, courage, and the shared will to live. The desert was still unforgiving, the journey far from over, but for now they were together, free, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The mechanic looked at the dragons, and for the first time he smiled without worry. They had made it through another day, and that was something worth celebrating. The desert morning was quiet, almost eerily so. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint rustle of sand across the dunes. The human mechanic stood at the edge of a rocky valley, surveying the path ahead. He could see the dragons moving carefully behind him, the smallest one hopping energetically, the middle one steady and alert, and the largest gliding low over the ground, wings spread to catch the morning breeze. They were still cautious, but he could feel the trust between them growing stronger with each step. Their journey had been long, and the desert had tested them in countless ways. They had survived the scorching heat, avoided deadly predators, and eluded the drones that might have captured them. But the mechanic knew that the hardest challenges were still ahead. Whoever had abandoned the dragons, or those who sought to capture them, was likely still looking. They had to keep moving, and they had to stay sharp. The rocky valley offered some shelter from the sun, and he led the dragons down carefully, stepping over loose stones and making sure the smaller one didn't stumble. As they descended, he noticed strange markings on the rocks, deep grooves that seemed too deliberate to be natural. He crouched to examine them more closely. They weren't just scratches. They looked like footprints, maybe of another creature or vehicle. He realized that others had been through this valley recently. Whoever they were, they could pose a threat. The smallest dragon pressed against his leg, sensing his tension. He reached down and stroked its scales gently. "It's okay," he whispered. "We'll be careful. Just stay close to me." The dragon seemed to understand, following him closely as he continued down the slope. The middle dragon mirrored his movements, its gaze constantly scanning the surroundings, and the largest dragon circled above, alert to any danger. As they moved, the mechanic thought about how much he had learned from the dragons already. They weren't just creatures. They were intelligent, capable of understanding him in ways that surprised him every day. The smallest dragon had begun to anticipate his gestures. The middle one responded to subtle signals, and the largest seemed almost to evaluate his decisions, offering silent guidance in the way it positioned itself. This bond wasn't just trust, it was cooperation. They were learning to work together as a team, and it gave him hope that they could survive the challenges ahead. Suddenly, a shimmer appeared on the horizon, catching his eye. At first, he thought it was a reflection of the sun, but as he focused, he saw the unmistakable shape of a large spacecraft descending slowly from the sky. His heart pounded. The dragons froze instantly, sensing the presence of something powerful and alien. The smallest one whimpered softly, pressing against his leg. The middle dragon crouched, tail flicking nervously, and the largest dragon spread its wings, hovering above them with a low growl that reverberated across the valley. The spacecraft landed gracefully on the sandy ground at the edge of the valley, and a figure emerged. The mechanic couldn't believe his eyes. It was the alien prince himself. He was tall and imposing, with a calm, commanding presence, yet there was an unmistakable gentleness in his eyes as he looked at the dragons. The mechanic instinctively stepped in front of them, unsure of the prince's intentions, but the dragons didn't move. They recognized him instantly. The alien prince spoke, his voice resonating with authority and warmth. "You have saved them," he said. "I did not expect a human to intervene. You have shown courage, compassion, and wisdom." The mechanic's mouth went dry. He had not expected gratitude. He had only acted out of instinct, out of a desire to help beings in need. The smallest dragon crept closer to the prince, and he reached down to stroke its head. It nudged him gently, a gesture of familiarity. The middle dragon stepped forward next, and the prince smiled, kneeling slightly to meet its gaze. Finally, the largest dragon lowered its head, bowing slightly in acknowledgement. The mechanic watched in awe, realizing that these creatures, whom he had feared and revered, were showing respect to the prince and by extension to him for having saved them. The prince explained that the dragons were crucial for interstellar peace. They carried knowledge, strength, and balance that could affect countless worlds. The drones, the predators, and the abandonment were all part of a plot to capture them and disrupt that balance. The mechanic felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. His actions had prevented a disaster, though he had only acted out of compassion. He had never imagined that his simple decision to help could have such far-reaching consequences. He knelt beside the smallest dragon, whispering softly, "We made it. You're safe now." The dragon looked up at him, eyes shining with trust and understanding. The middle dragon pressed against him briefly, and the largest gave a low rumble of acknowledgement. In that moment, he realized that the bond they shared was unbreakable, built on courage, patience, and mutual respect. The alien prince approached him, extending a hand. "I offer you knowledge and tools from my world as a reward," he said. "But I sense your heart values simple life and integrity more than wealth or power." The mechanic shook his head gently, smiling. "I just did what I thought was right," he said. "That's all?" The prince nodded, his gaze kind but serious. "Then take this," he said, handing him a small device. It looked simple, but the mechanic could sense it was far beyond human technology. "It will help you care for them, and it will protect you if danger comes again. But more importantly, it is a symbol of trust. You are now a guardian, recognized by those who understand the universe beyond your world." The mechanic accepted it humbly. He felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but it was not a burden, it was an honor. The dragon, sensing the change in energy, nudged him gently as if approving the gift and acknowledging his role. The smallest dragon nuzzled his hand, the middle one rested its head near him, and the largest spread its wings once, a signal of readiness for the next chapter of their journey. As they prepared to leave the desert behind, the mechanic realized that the journey had transformed him. He was no longer just a human walking through a barren landscape. He was part of something larger, something that connected worlds, creatures, and lives in ways he had never imagined. The dragons were no longer captives, they were allies, companions, and teachers in their own way. And he, in turn, had learned the power of courage, patience, and compassion. The spacecraft lifted off, the alien prince giving a final nod of acknowledgement before ascending into the sky. The mechanic watched as it disappeared into the horizon, leaving him and the dragons alone in the desert once more. But now he felt no fear. They had faced danger, survived, and forged a bond that would guide them through whatever came next. He led the dragons toward the distant mountains, knowing that shelter, water, and safety awaited them there. The journey would not be easy. The desert was vast and challenges would continue. But for the first time, he felt a deep confidence in their ability to face them together. Each dragon moved in harmony with him, responsive to his gestures, trusting his decisions and willing to follow his lead. The sun climbed high again, casting long shadows over the dunes. The mechanic offered water and rations, making sure each dragon was ready for the day. The smallest dragon drank eagerly. The middle one sipped cautiously, and the largest simply observed, scanning the horizon with its sharp eyes. They were alert, aware, and strong, and he knew that their journey was far from over. But they were ready. As the desert stretched endlessly before them, he whispered softly to the dragons, "We'll make it. Together we'll find safety and peace." The dragons responded in their own ways, the smallest hopping ahead slightly, the middle one pausing to look back at him, and the largest gliding low over the sand. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed trust, acknowledgement, and readiness for the journey ahead. Step by step, dune by dune, they moved forward. The desert was harsh, but they were stronger together. The human mechanic had rescued them, yes, but they had also rescued him in a way, teaching him trust, courage, and the importance of standing for what is right. Their story was far from over, but for now they were united, free, and ready to face whatever challenges awaited them beyond the horizon. And in that quiet, vast desert under the blazing sun, a human and 3 alien dragons continued their journey, bound not by chains, but by trust, courage, and an unspoken promise to protect each other no matter what. The desert was quieter than ever. The sun was high, casting a golden glow over the sand and making the world seem endless. The human mechanic led the dragons carefully, moving toward distant mountains that promised shelter, water, and safety. The air was dry and hot, but the small band of travelers had become a team, working together to survive. The dragons, once frightened and chained, now moved with confidence, each step deliberate and measured. The smallest hopped beside him eagerly, the middle stayed alert and calm, and the largest glided low, keeping watch over them. The mechanic felt a deep sense of responsibility. He had rescued them from the desert, but he now realized that protection meant more than freeing them from chains. It meant ensuring they survived the harsh environment, avoiding dangers and guiding them to safety. The weight of this responsibility pressed on his shoulders, but it was a challenge he accepted willingly. He knew that the dragons trusted him completely, and he could not let them down. Hours passed as they traversed the dunes and rocky paths. The smallest dragon occasionally scurried ahead, then came back, checking in to make sure he was still with them. The middle dragon mirrored his movements, always keeping near, ready to respond to any sign of danger. The largest dragon flew low, wings cutting through the air smoothly, scanning the horizon. Together they moved as one unit, a strange but effective partnership of human and alien dragons. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, a subtle but urgent vibration. The mechanic froze, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, he could see movement. Not drones this time, but something larger, darker, creatures that moved with purpose, their shapes shifting against the sun. He recognized the signs immediately. These were predators, likely drawn by the dragon's presence. The smallest dragon whimpered softly and pressed against his leg. The middle dragon crouched low, tail flicking nervously, and the largest dragon gave a low growl, warning the creatures to keep their distance. The mechanic knew they had to act quickly. He couldn't outrun the predators alone, but the dragons were powerful and intelligent. He signaled to them silently, relying on the bond they had built. The largest dragon took the lead, swooping down and creating a barrier between the mechanic and the approaching danger. The middle dragon circled low, ready to intercept any threats, while the smallest stayed close, protected by the others. Step by step, they moved toward a rocky outcrop that offered higher ground. The terrain was uneven, and the mechanic carefully tested each foothold before stepping. The dragons moved with him, responsive to his guidance. Together they climbed, leaving the predators struggling behind in the sand below. When they reached the top, the mechanic glanced back. The predators had stopped, unwilling or unable to climb the rocks, and the dragon's presence had been enough to ward them off. They rested briefly, drinking water and catching their breath. The smallest dragon drank eagerly, the middle one sipped carefully, and the largest merely observed, scanning the surroundings. The mechanic looked at them and smiled, feeling a surge of pride. They had survived so much together, and each challenge only strengthened the bond they shared. The dragons were no longer captives or frightened creatures. They were allies, companions, and even friends in a strange, alien way. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, they moved again. The mountains were now visible, jagged and imposing, but offering hope. Shelter, water, and safety awaited there, and the mechanic knew they had to reach it before nightfall. The desert could be unforgiving in the dark, and predators were more active then. He led them carefully, keeping the dragons close and using hand signals to guide them. The smallest dragon hopped beside him. The middle one stayed alert, and the largest glided overhead, wings spread wide, keeping watch. They reached the base of the mountains just as twilight began to settle. The rocks offered protection from the wind and sand, and he led the dragons into a sheltered crevice where they could rest safely. He checked them for injuries. The largest had a few scratches, the middle one a small cut on its wing, and the smallest had a bruise from earlier tumbles in the sand. Using rags and water from his supplies, he cleaned and tended to them carefully. The dragons watched silently, trusting him completely. Night fell over the mountains and the desert became cold. The mechanic huddled with the dragons, sharing warmth and comfort. The smallest curled against his side, the middle rested its head near him, and the largest lay slightly apart, but still within reach. They had survived the desert, avoided predators, and overcome countless dangers, and now they were safe for the first time in a long while. As he watched them, the mechanic reflected on everything that had happened. He had rescued the dragons from chains, navigated deadly terrain, and protected them from threats that were beyond his understanding. Yet it wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, compassion, and courage. The dragons had taught him as much as he had taught them, and the bond they shared was stronger than he could have imagined. The next morning, the sun rose over the mountains, casting a warm glow across the valley. The mechanic prepared the dragons for the day, offering water and food. The smallest drank eagerly, the middle sipped carefully, and the largest stretched its wings, preparing for flight. They were ready to continue their journey, moving towards safety and a new life away from the desert and the dangers that had haunted them. As they moved, the mechanic noticed signs of life in the mountains, small streams, vegetation, and the distant sound of birds. It was a stark contrast to the barren desert below, and it filled him with hope. The dragons seemed to sense it too, moving more confidently and energetically. The smallest dragon hopped ahead with excitement, the middle followed with caution but curiosity, and the largest glided overhead, observing the terrain for any signs of danger. Suddenly, a shimmer appeared in the distance. The mechanic froze, tense, but then he realized it was not a threat. It was a group of friendly alien creatures, the allies of the alien prince. They had come to guide the dragons to a safe sanctuary, a place where they would be protected and could thrive. Relief washed over him. Their journey had been long and dangerous, but now the end was in sight. The friendly aliens approached carefully, speaking softly to the dragons. The largest lowered its head in recognition, the middle stepped forward, and the smallest hopped eagerly to meet them. The mechanic watched, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. He had grown close to these creatures, and parting would be difficult. But he knew this was the best outcome. They would finally be safe, free from harm, and among their own kind. The aliens gestured for him to come closer. The alien prince's message from before echoed in his mind. His role was as a guardian and protector, but the dragons now had a new chapter awaiting them. The mechanic smiled softly. "You're safe now," he whispered to them. The dragons responded in their own ways, a soft nuzzle, a gentle rumble, and a flick of their wings. They understood his words, and they accepted that their journey together had reached this point. Before leaving, the mechanic used the small device given to him by the alien prince. It emitted a gentle glow, communicating with the dragons in ways he didn't fully understand. The dragons' eyes brightened, and they responded instinctively, as if the device reinforced their connection to him and to the prince's world. It was a final gesture of trust and acknowledgement, a symbol of the bond they had shared throughout their journey. He stepped back as the friendly aliens guided the dragons toward the sanctuary. The smallest looked back once, giving a small chirp that seemed almost like a goodbye. The middle dragon paused and nodded its head slightly, and the largest spread its wings wide, a silent farewell. The mechanic felt a lump in his throat, but also immense pride. He had saved them, guided them, and earned their trust. Their survival was a testament to courage, patience, and compassion. As the dragons disappeared into the mountains, the mechanic turned back to the desert. He looked at the sun rising higher in the sky, casting golden light over the sand and rocks. The journey had changed him. He was no longer just a human mechanic. He was a guardian, a protector, and someone who had touched lives beyond his world. The desert, once a place of danger and fear, now felt like a place of triumph and growth. He began walking back toward civilization, carrying memories of the dragons and the lessons they had taught him. Courage, trust, patience, and compassion. These were the values that had guided him through the desert and would continue to guide him in life. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had proven that even one human could make a difference, even in a world full of danger and uncertainty. The mountain stood tall behind him, a symbol of the dragon's safety and a reminder of the journey they had endured together. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but he no longer feared it. With each step, he carried with him the bond he had formed with the dragons, the courage he had discovered within himself, and the knowledge that even in the harshest places, trust and compassion could create miracles. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, the human mechanic walked alone but not lonely. His heart was full, and he knew that the dragons were safe, thriving, and free. Their story had ended in triumph, and his own journey was richer for having shared it. Indeed,